The 1871 Los Angeles Massacre. Not only was it one of the most bloodiest carnage in the history book of the city, but also the largest mass lynching in the whole nation. With more than 1,000 deaths, the incident was the product of Asian hate from the white people in 19th century. What makes this event special from other Asian discrimination is that the 1871 Los Angeles Massacre has truly reflected a system of oppression towards the Asians. And this is also why I would like to discuss this event for my project. Now, let us rewind the clock and see how it happened. The origin of Asian hate commenced with a gold rush in California. In 1848, gold was found in California. Soon, the news was spread across the world, and therefore many Chinese moved to Gold Mountain for making a fortune from it. By 1852, there were already 25,000 Chinese immigrants in comparison to 325 in 1848. After moving to California, the Chinese did not only search for gold, but also made up a portion of the labor force in the city. For example, they helped build the first transcontinental railroad and worked on farms and mining. Because they were willing to work in these dangerous and cheap jobs, which were in high demand during the period, the Chinese laborer quickly became popular in the market. As a result, the white felt angry and claimed that the Chinese stole their job and gold. And this was the beginning of Asian hate. By the year 1870, the Chinese had already taken up a quarter of the labor force in California. The white claimed that the Chinese laborers were a threat to their employment, and therefore protest against the employer who hired Chinese workers. Soon, the complaint became a pure race hatred. As Los Angeles News put it, the Chinese was a curse to our country and a fault brought upon our civilization. Meanwhile, as the news came out, there was a skyrocketing increase in racist attacks on the Chinese. As such, the anger from the white has become extremely dangerous toward the Chinese. The tragedy started from a conflict between two groups of Chinese gangsters. On the morning of 23rd October in 1871, assassin Ah Choi attempted to kill Yok Han, the chairman of the Chinese crime family, but failed. He shot Yok Han, but the bullets missed. Therefore, Yok Han managed to escape safely. On the afternoon of 24th October, the day after the shootout, Yok Han and his men came in front of a house where Ah Choi was having dinner inside. He shot Ah Choi in the neck and killed him. Then, a gunfight broke out between Yok Han's men and Ah Choi's people. Jesus Battering, a police officer, heard the gunshot and rushed to the house. There, he managed to stop the gunfight and arrest one of the gunmen. However, the others had run away. Baldwin has followed one of the criminals into a stall, where the people inside fired their guns on him. He quickly blew his whistle and asked for support. Other officers quickly arrived and soon escalated into a massive gunfight between the Chinese and the policemen. Famous bar owner Robert Thompson rushed to help the policeman, but was accidentally killed by a shot in the chest from the return fire of the Chinese. As Robert Thompson was popular and loved by the white people in the city, they felt angry hearing the death of the barkeeper. Worse still, there was also a rumor that the Chinese people were killing the white men by wholesale in a liquor alley. As such, driven by anger and hatred, A large group of white men entered the alley and began their cruel acts. At 8:45 p.m., a mob formed by over 500 white men brutally killed and injured the Chinese people on the street, regardless of their innocence. One of their victims was a famous doctor, Chinatown, an innocent man who was well educated and spoke fluent English. Tong was popular even among the white since the Chinese medicine was more efficient than the Western at that time. He was dragged away from his bed and hanged in the public. Before his hanging, the white hit his head against the ceiling several times. As the witnesses report, each hit sounded like the breaking of a watermelon, and the white did this to know the secret of his wealth. On the other hand, teenager Aluk was also being hanged by the white. He held the rope above his head and tried to escape. Then, the two of the mobs hit his hand with clubs and grips of the pistol for over 5 minutes, until they crushed every bone of his hand, eventually finish him off with bullets. During the 2-hour-long massacre, the alleys were filled with screams and laughter. The white mobs were hyped up and asked for more victims, where one of the murderers was only a 10-year-old child, who shouted to hang more Chinese in his childish voice. Another rioter danced on the balcony. "Bring me more Chinamen, boys. Patronize the home trade." The other white Americans found entertainment by smashing Chinese people's heads against the iron fence. In Gola's wagon shop, 5 Chinese called Wang Fu, Lo Hei, Hong Heng, Dai Qi, and Tong Wing were hanged to death along with Alu. On Commercial Street, Wang Chi, Ah Wong, and Wang Chi were hanged from a wagon and dragged along the street. In Dr. Tong, Tom Leeson caroled, quickly after Dr. Tong's death. The Chinese in the building were also murdered by the white rioters. Alon, Long Q, Chen Wing, and Ah Wing were hanged from the ceiling. When the sun came up, there were 18 deaths in this slaughter. Blood was smeared on the walls and floors of the buildings. 70 bodies covered with bullet holes and blood were found lying on the ground. The 18 victims were buried after his hanging. Not only did the whites cruelly murder innocent Chinese people, but they also took away numerous money and valuables from their victims. 3,500 worth of merchandise and 3,000 coins was stolen from one of the stores during the riot. And the pockets of the dead bodies were also being looted by the whites. With almost 1/10 population wiped out in the Chinese community, what were the consequences for the rioters? Nothing. Among 500 rioters, only 10 of them were charged, with none of them eventually going to jail because of the California Statute of 1683, which forbade the Chinese from handing over any evidence involving a child of the white person. Therefore, the Chinese failed to prove if the suspect had killed anyone. From this tragedy, we can observe a whole system of oppression towards Asians, namely the crowd, the law enforcer, and the legislation system. To commerce with, the police did not fairly treat innocent Chinese citizens. During the siege of the store, where the killers of the bar owner was hiding in, Chef James Burns ordered his men to kill anyone attempt to leave the store, allowing the rioter to rush in and kill everyone inside. In addition, one of the policemen, J.C. Cross, joined the riot and helped kill innocent Chinese people. Even during the massacre, the police did not attempt to arrest any of the rioters because they thought the Chinese citizens were not under the law's protection. In addition, the legislation system had targeted the Chinese citizens and set up racist law against them. The California Statute of 1683 hindered the victims of the massacre from pressing charges against the murderer. Therefore, all the murderer can get away from the crime. In addition, even after the tragedy, the government did not attempt to ban or adjust the law, but released the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. Lastly, the crowd was responsible for this massacre. Before the massacre, the media openly criticized the Chinese and create a bad public impression of the Chinese, which led to an increase in racial attacks against the Asian Americans in the town. Even after the massacre, the news continued to attack the Chinese in the papers. Also, among the rioters, it was reported that many of the murderers felt enjoyed more than angry when killing innocent Chinese people. Therefore, this massacre was not an act of revenge, but indeed a massive racist attack that started with an excuse of a white man's death. Despite the occurrence of this incident, it did not symbolize the end of this tragic race hatred. Instead, it worsened the lives of the Chinese in Los Angeles. The news criticized the Chinese for bringing a bad reputation to the city. The white Americans continued to hate and eradicate the Chinese. And the living condition of Chinese did not get any better. The consequences to the rioters had showed that there will be no punishment for hurting Chinese people. And the racist legislation system continued to put pressure on the lives of Asian Americans by raising the taxes on Chinese businesses and setting up the notorious Chinese Exclusion Act in the following years. In a modern civilized world, this would sound impossible to us. However, this dark history did happen and is often ignored by the world.